You checking in with Mike Williams from the LA Chargers, and you're tuning into Chargers Unleashed.
Welcome to another edition of Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Dan Wolkenstein here with you from the LA Football Network. Today's show, of course, is being brought to you by BetOnline, Aura, Athletic Greens, Mint Mobile, and Rock Solid Sports Memorabilia. If this is your first time tuning into the show, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Dan Wolkenstein, we're at the 30. We're at the 20.
Okay, Chris Berman.
We're 2 days away from training camp. We are nearly there. Training camp week is finally upon us. So excited for the events of this upcoming week. Lots to talk about as we get geared up for training camp. Dan Wolkenstein, before we get into this very interesting episode, and maybe it's only fitting that less than 24 hours before Twitter was branded as X, that we're talking about X factors for this Chargers team heading into this season. First and foremost, sir, how are you?
I am good. I am great. Thank you for asking. We're rumbling. We're stumbling to day one of Chargers training camp. Less than 48 hours away, which is so exciting to hear. So refreshing. So exciting for this one. Honestly, tons of X factors, tons of variables. Some may be surprises in what will amount to Chargers' success or failure in 2023. Tons of names we're going to get into here. But, Jake, before we go further, how was your weekend? How are you?
Man, it was actually an eventful weekend.
How was Oppenheimer, by the way?
First of all, on a personal note, great for the box office in terms of seeing what Barbenheimer essentially did. To see that much revenue come in off of two movies. Dan, they said I believe it was the fourth highest box office weekend in the history. So it's like Endgame was number one, Infinity War was two. I'm losing it now. There was another box office weekend that was.
I think it was Star Wars.
Yes, you're right. It was Force Awakens. That's correct. And Barbenheimer comes in at number 4, which is absolutely amazing. But Oppenheimer was great. Maybe feels a little bit long, but the story just keeps you engaged. And I personally think it's one of Christopher Nolan's best, if not his best. You're definitely going to see Academy Award nominations for the actors in this movie. I thought it was a tremendous story. And it resonates with a message that back then was important and is still important today. And it was great seeing a movie theater as packed as it was for a 2:30 showing in the afternoon on a Saturday, which was awesome.
Dude, I went to the mall yesterday. Again, this is Sunday night. And it was like, 5 o'clock. And the parking structure was loaded. There's a movie theater at the mall. Loaded to like the 4th level. I'm like, I haven't gone past the first level that goes up to the 2nd level in the parking structure. And I was thinking, could this be because of the Barbenheimer? Like, geez, this is crazy. So I think it had something to do with that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, weekend good?
Weekend was great. No complaints. We're ready for training camp.
Let's get into the fun stuff. Jake, over or under number of linebackers you're going to see on the field week 1 in the box score?
Well, the box score, I was like, where are you going with this?
Yeah. So we know the Chargers are primarily, they're always going to have one, and they almost always, they kind of lean towards having one linebacker on the field. So that's Eric Kendricks all day long. But how many opportunities will there be, not special teams, for those other linebackers to have snaps? So I'm going to go over or under 24.5 total snaps from folks not named Eric Kendricks on defense.
24.5 snaps. This all kind of hinges on the type of training camp that Deion Henley is going to have. And like you said, excluding special team snaps, which we primarily expect him, that's where he's going to make a lot of his bread and butter at the beginning of this season. Mm-hmm. Something tells me that they would look to work him in there in some way or another. Even if it's just single digits here, I'll say over.
So over 24.5, and that's basically combining Kenneth Murray, Deion Henley, and everyone else.
And player X, whoever it is.
Woo! Okay, Jake, real quick, let's talk about our friends over at BetOnline before we pay the bills.
Want to remind everybody that BetOnline is your number one source for all of your sports betting info this season. Always the fastest and easiest way to get all of your betting info, including live betting options and your favorite casino and card games available to play right from your very own home. All you got to do to get into the action is go on over to the website betonline.ag and use the mobile device to join. And be sure to use the promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, where the game starts.
Hidden figures, hidden variables, and X factors. That's what we're going to be talking about here on this episode. What are the biggest X factors for this Chargers team? We're going to talk about guys like, obviously, probably the biggest one of all isn't even a player. We're talking about offensive coordinator Kellen Moore. We talk about guys like J.C. Jackson, Justin Herbert. Who's going to be CB3, 4? We'll talk about some of the interior defensive line, running backs. We'll talk about a lot of stuff here. Jake, let's just talk about kind of the obvious, okay? And let's just kind of set the stage about what we're talking about. No question. Names like Justin Herbert, names like Derwin James, names like Joey Bosa, and I'll put Joey Bosa kind of in both, but these are obvious X factors. If you were on Madden and you were playing, who are the biggest X factors on the team? Those would be the guys, like Keenan Allen, those kinds of guys. We're not talking about like who are the best players on the team. We're talking about the players who have the biggest impact on the team's potential success, but have a very high variance. Like they could be great, they could not be great due to either play, success, play time, injury, who knows. That's where we're going with here. So to start this one off, I don't know if there's a bigger name in terms of X factor that has the most impact and trickle-down effects than J.C. Jackson. And we've had a whole episode dedicated to him, so we don't have to put much time into this, but in short, there are so many ramifications and variables that will be solved for if J.C. Jackson, A, plays, and B, returns to Mr. INT form. So we've talked about how important he is. He's probably the biggest X factor on this defense in terms of like where the team can go. But I want to kind of put that out there as like we know him. Obviously, Justin Herbert, don't need to go there. But we're talking about the rest of the guys. Jake, which player or position, doesn't matter, do you want to start with?
Let's talk about the edge, Dan, because I feel like one hand's going to wash the other. And then when you can improve the pass rush, that's obviously going to make your secondary better. So that's where I would probably want to start, is at the edge position.
Okay, so X factor on the edge position, I think it has to be Joey Bosa. And for 100%. A player that gets paid as much money as he does, and I know he was injured last year, and there's a lot of stuff even when he was on the field, they're paying him way more than what he has produced. And I understand the value he brings. I understand how his win rate is so good and how crucially it's the defense. He's got to show up in the box score too. When you have a player like Khalil Mack in the defense, like what they have with Brandon Staley's scheme, you got to close. And you got to stay on the field. And you can't be doing some of these boneheaded things that we saw at the end of the year. So if Joey Bosa can be Joey Bosa on the field, let's ride.
And Dan, you talk about the X factor piece of this, just as far as the trickle-down effect that this has for other players. I mean, let's not forget the duo of Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa that people said last offseason was just unfair to have two guys of that caliber on the same team rushing the passer at the same time. We only got a chance to see that for 2 games. And despite what you may think, there was basically no pass rush beyond Khalil Mack that was on this team when Joey Bosa went down. And even still, Khalil Mack still did the best that he could. 8 sacks, 56 total pressures for the duration of the season. But you weren't able to get enough from Chris Rumph, opposite of him last year. Even when the Chargers tried to rotate, whether it was a combination of Tillery or Fox at the edge position, obviously it ended up being Kyle Van Noy, who was, gave you a little bit more juice towards the end of the season. But you need someone that's going to be able to get that consistent pressure opposite someone like Khalil Mack. And to think that we only got 2 games out of the Bosa-Mack combination just really is unfortunate. So now you look at it, both players are healthy heading into this training camp. Chargers reloaded their edge position a little bit and bringing in Tuli Tuipulotu, who they drafted with their 2nd overall pick, who I think is going to get plenty of opportunities, even coming in as an edge 3. Joey Bosa needs to get back to that Joey Bosa form of being dominant. And back in the days, and I'm talking very early in his career when he used to pair with Melvin Ingram on the opposite side, that was some of the most productive edge play that the Chargers had in a long time. Both of those guys fed off each other.
And no offense to Melvin Ingram, he's not Khalil Mack, even at this age.
Correct. So if you can get both of these guys now to feed off of each other for the entirety of a season,
or most of it,
not only is your pass rush going to improve, obviously, by having Joey Bosa on the field, but that, in terms of trickle-down effects, is going to have a positive impact on your next level at your linebacker position, the interior of your defensive line, and ultimately the secondary. Because the lesser time a quarterback has to throw the ball, it's going to do wonders for your defensive backs. So Joey Bosa, 100%, has to be the X factor. I know he's a premier name, but in this type of circumstance, when you saw how important he was when he went down for this defense, specifically the pass rush last year, you got to have a player like him out there on the field.
Yeah, and you could probably lump in Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack together as kind of the X factor impact. Like at the end of the day, if you think about it, Joey Bosa went down, Khalil Mack kind of just slotted in and took that Joey Bosa role. So we went from Joey Bosa in 2021 to Joey Bosa plus Khalil Mack, then minus Joey Bosa. So it's kind of just Joey Bosa 21, Khalil Mack 2022. If we can get both in 2023, that's where you're going to see it. Like I think the Chargers ranked 21st in pressure grade according to PFF last year. If you have Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa, that number is way higher. But when you only have one, that's different. Like you said, the ramifications of a great pass rush, are huge. This next one for me, I think is important that we talk about. And we've talked about it ad nauseum about Kellen Moore, how important he is and the X factor. He's probably, and there's been a lot of like national media, he's probably the biggest X factor on the entire team this year because of how much he impacts the success of everyone on offense, including the defense because of the final score. Kellen Moore's Justin Herbert is going to look very different. Kellen Moore's wide receiver production is going to look very different. Kellen Moore's tight end production is going to look very different. Kellen Moore's running game is going to look very different. Because we could talk about the running game as an X factor, Justin Herbert as X factor, the wide receiving core as an X factor, all those guys. We could talk about that. All of them are predicated on Kellen Moore. And for as much as we talk about the weapons on this offense, it's time that their handcuffs are taken off. And I think that's what everyone's hoping for with Kellen Moore. And you should be able to see that. People talked about it. You saw it during camp. You should be able to see it during OTAs. Definitely going to see it during week 1 immediately. And so that's probably the storyline that I think has gotten the most buzz probably this season, but rightly so.
Definitely.
Because of how impactful that is to everyone, to every group, to ownership, to the fans, like his type of offense, whether that's aggressiveness, whether that is throwing the ball downfield, whether that's creativity, whether it's effectiveness, all of that is what makes him probably the biggest X factor on the entire team.
I think it's all predicated on, Dan, like you said, all that wrapped together. And as much as we want to talk about what Kellen Moore is going to do for the individual position groups, it's been well documented as far as the running game, the downfield passing attack. I think all of that is just lumped into overall aggressiveness, which the Chargers need to be, which I feel like they have. You've seen flashes of it at times, but when we're talking about the difference between winning and losing games, and I'm not talking about aggressiveness in terms of Fourth and Staley. There's a difference between being aggressive and recklessness. I think you're going to find the happy medium here with Brandon Staley and Kellen Moore in this circumstance. But Dan, at the rate that the Cowboys were scoring points, and as effective and as an offense as they have been for the last several years under Kellen Moore as offensive coordinator for them, just think about what you could possibly do when you have a quarterback like Justin Herbert at the helm. And you finally need to unlock the full potential and utilize the full potential of Justin Herbert. As I said, we've seen Justin Herbert plenty of times, how lethal he is, how accurate he is when he is outside the pocket. The added aspect of his running game as a quarterback and being mobile, to add that to this game. What looks to be the improved mechanics during OTAs and minicamp that we've essentially seen. There are so many trickle-down effects that basically we always want to say, yes, this ship is going to go as Justin Herbert's going to go, which is 100% true. But as Dan alluded to, Kellen Moore's Justin Herbert should look very, very different. And there's a reason why you've heard some people talk about Kellen Moore being one of the biggest offseason acquisitions for any team in the entire NFL. And this is another reason why there are some people that are talking about Justin Herbert in the MVP combination because of Kellen Moore. Extremely important. I'm so excited to see what this offense is going to look like.
Jake, you hear a lot of people talk about, like, you are your weakest link. You're as strong as your weakest link. And there's a bunch of studs, proven studs on this Chargers defense. I think one of the biggest X factors on defense, position-wise, is safety 2, whoever that is, alongside Derwin James. And a lot of people have talked up Alohi Gilman, rightly so. I've heard a lot of praise about him. We've also heard rumblings about John Johnson. Who knows about Mark Webb, JT Woods? No idea. That last line of defense next to Derwin James, you hear all the time about opposing offenses finding the weakest link and just targeting it over and over and over again. That position, in my eyes, is the weakest link on this Chargers secondary, period. Look at Derwin James. You got Asante Samuel Jr., Mike Davis, J.C. Jackson, hell, Jazir Taylor in there. Alohi Gilman, that role, especially being the back end, last line of defense. Talk about variables. If Alohi Gilman or whoever is in that position is not good, Chargers are in trouble. Now, they were 6th best in the NFL last year when you had Derwin James and either Nazir Adderley or Alohi Gilman in there. So there's reason to believe it should be fine. But that's a big variable. Like, can Alohi Gilman do that the entire season, or whoever it is, do that the entire season next to Derwin James? Because if they can, Derwin James can play everywhere. But if they can't, it's going to be a long road ahead for this Chargers secondary.
I think it is the big question, and I think you're right in terms of the weakest link at the secondary position, no question. Maybe even possibly this entire defense, you may look at that as, with just so much question marks behind it, is to say, okay, who's going to be the guy that's going to step up with Derwin James? And obviously right now it looks like, based on everything that we've read, based on everything that we've heard from coaches and players alike, that Alohi Gilman is going to come into that role. Now, will the Chargers go out and sign another free safety for competition? John Johnson, I don't know. I don't know if that's going to happen at this point. You've started to see a few signings around the league, so maybe this is like that right time window for that to possibly happen. Who knows? Alohi Gilman, to his credit, Dan, when he was asked to step up last year, he did. And I keep always going back to that first play in the Miami game when Alohi Gilman was credited for covering Asante Samuel Jr., went downfield. He stayed with him step for step, and it was an incomplete pass. And through that, he was even the one later in the game who caused the fumble that unfortunately he should have fallen on, instead of Tyreek Hill just pulling a rabbit out of a hat and running 80 yards the other way and scoring a touchdown. So I really commend his play, and especially at a time when he needed to. When Nasir Adderley went down with a thumb injury, he was down for a little while and then ultimately now ends up retiring from the NFL. So there is a big void to fill in terms of a full-time role for Alohi Gilman. Like you just said, can he do that the entirety of the season? We don't know. And then what is going to be the rotation with JT Woods? If everything stays the way it should, I say he doesn't get further than safety 3. And hopefully you get a chance to excel his development a little bit more, because obviously there's still a lot that needs to be seen from him. But Alohi Gilman, Dan, I think that he has the tools to be a Is he going to be one of the best free safeties in the league? No, and we should not expect the world from him. But if you're telling me that he can come in and be a comparable safety to Derwin James at what he does at the strong safety position and be able to make plays in a similar fashion and hopefully a little bit better of a clip than that he was making toward the tail end last year, then I think you've got something with that. Derwin has praised him. Derek Ansley, the defensive coordinator, has praised his work as well. He's obviously spent a lot of time in that reserve role since he has been with this team. And this could be his perfect opportunity for the next step. So while it's still a question mark and you still feel a little bit tentative about the depth or whoever you want to say is going to be at that free safety position, Alohi Gilman, regardless, has to step up in one way or another.
Yeah, if they could get Alohi Gilman to play like the Eric Weddle type of role, like I think it's kind of like his ceiling in terms of like archetype, like different players, obviously, but I think his style seems like an Eric Weddle. And it's kind of interesting because he and Derwin James both they're kind of box safeties. Like Alohi Gilman kind of seems like a strong safety hybrid. Like he's not, like you think about twitchy athletic, you think about like how JT Woods is, right? Like 4'3" something. That's not Alohi Gilman. I think really that's what they'd like to have. It's someone with that athleticism. But in terms of like the safety valve, I think that's where Alohi Gilman gives them a much higher floor than the other guys right now. One player last year that I think probably could have gotten more juice if they gave him the opportunity and was arguably the most underrated underrated signing was probably Morgan Fox.
Oh, man.
For how little he got paid last year and the contract that they got him on this year, Morgan Fox balled out last year. And if it wasn't for Morgan Fox, this defense would have looked way worse. And he covered up a whole lot of blemishes, including in run support, in pass defense, rushing the passer, you name it. I hope that we see an uptick in opportunities for Morgan Fox. And I know you got Thule behind him now in kind of the edge/interior lineman kind of hybrid type of player. But Morgan Fox has the opportunity to really splash in this defense when you look at the depth that they have now. Before, they brought him in, but it was kind of like in case of emergency, break glass. And thank the Lord that Morgan Fox was like there to save them a little bit. I think this team knows what they have with Morgan Fox now. Now, can they add a little bit to give him more opportunity to be Morgan Fox in Staley's defense? I hope so. But Morgan Fox is one of those names that, it's kind of one of that like tier 2, tier 3 that a lot of guys don't talk about when they initially think of the Chargers defense.
Yes.
But he was arguably one of the biggest like glue points on this Chargers defensive line last year. When there was so much churn, he was one of the constants that kept them afloat, so to speak.
Dan, this was the most snaps that Morgan Fox has ever seen in the defensive line ever in his career this past year, 572. And maybe it's a strange enigma for the fact that he had one of his most productive seasons that he had since he had been with the Rams in 2020 with Brandon Staley. No coincidence there whatsoever. But Morgan Fox was just such a value add to this team for a number of different reasons, not just contractually what you ended up getting for how late you got him in the season last year, and then ultimately what he ended up doing for your defense when you had a number of interior defensive linemen going down. I still believe he is better suited for the interior, the defensive line position than he is at edge as far as getting to the quarterback in that circumstance. And I think that the Chargers are really going to need him because as of this moment, we still don't know what the official timeline is going to be for Austin Johnson or Tito Agbanima returning back to the field. Hopefully, as we know, they've both been rehabbing injuries, but we don't know what their status is going to be for training camp this week. We don't know what it's going to be officially for week 1. And at a defensive line position that just has ridiculous depth behind it, you may have to turn to Morgan Fox very, very early for assistance in terms of getting interior pass rush, which the Chargers have lacked for I don't even want to guesstimate how many years, but getting that push up front in between the tackles, that is where you can make an entire difference. Now, run defense needs to be a little bit better. Obviously, that was true for a lot of the guys along the interior defensive line with the Chargers. No surprise there. But in terms of what he gives you as an interior defensive pass rush scenario or just situation, Morgan Fox arguably today is one of your best in that circumstance. And so the value that you have with a guy like that, when we're talking about pairing him with the likes of Sebastian Joseph Day, or when he comes back, Austin Johnson, the type of rotation that you could find with him and coming off the snap on, say, 3rd and 12, 3rd and long, if the Chargers are able to get in those type of scenarios to get after the quarterback from the inside, it's just ridiculous value. And it's production, even however you want to weigh it, it's production that the Chargers haven't had from an interior defensive lineman like that in a minute.
Yeah, I agree. Morgan Fox's role is going to be fascinating to watch this year. Jake, let's look to the offense. Nothing more important to Justin Herbert in this run game than protection. Before we get to that, though, Jake, let's talk about another protection that Chargers fans can have, and that is with our friends over at Aura. Give us 53 seconds. Let's listen to how we can help you save your identity with our friends over at Aura.
Have you ever Googled yourself and were shocked to see your personal information exposed on one of those public listing sites? Data brokers are making a fortune selling your information to robocallers, spammers, and others who want to learn more about you, like where you live.
We've been trying to reach you concerning your car's extended warranty.
That's why I'm excited to tell you about today's sponsor, Aura. Aura can identify data brokers exposing your info and submit opt-out requests on your behalf, and brokers everywhere are legally required to remove your info if you ask them to, but they make it super hard to do. So let Aura handle that for you. You could try Aura for up to 2 weeks using this link that we're going to put up here on the screen. Aura also does so much more to protect you and your family from online threats that you cannot see. So make sure to check out aura.com/Chargers Unleashed to get a 14-day free trial and see if your personal information has been leaked online. So Dan, you mentioned the offensive line just a second ago. Specifically, let's talk about Jamari Sawyer moving from left tackle, essentially, even in a replacement Band-Aid position last year, over to right guard. This is going to improve the right side of the line very much, in my belief. And yes, we haven't seen it yet. We haven't seen him next to Trey Pipkins. But you mean to tell me that Jamari Sawyer, for as good as he did holding down his own as the left tackle position last year, now you're going to have him placed with Corey Linsley to his left, Trey Pipkins to his right, and in a new Kellen Moore system that I think is going to be much more aggressive when it comes to getting their guys downhill, open up a lot of lanes in terms of running the ball better. Jamari Sawyer, and I was really weighing this between Jamari Sawyer and Zion Johnson, and I think I looked at Sawyer just from the standpoint of position switch to a number of different things when it comes to this, because I know for Zion, he's actually moving back to his more natural position. So I would expect him to pick this offense up a little bit quicker, and that just feel more natural for him. But Jamari Sawyer, even going back to college, essentially played everywhere along the offensive line. So this won't be completely foreign to him. But I think when we're talking about over the last couple of years, what's been the weakest side of the Chargers offensive line? Undoubtedly it's been the right side, and the Chargers need to get better play from that. And I think when you put such a big body the way that Jamari Sawyer has, alongside the improvement of Trey Pipkins and next to Corey Linsley, again, as I say, in this system, as you like to say, Dan, the trickle down effect once again from Kellen Moore. How is this all going to come together and look? This should be a much improved right side of the offensive line. Even though it stays on paper, it should still be a much improved right side of the Chargers offensive line. So Sawyer going to that side, I think, is going to benefit his play, Trey Pipkins' play, Justin Herbert's play, this running game's play. So I think there's a lot of interesting things that could take place in a very, very positive way for this offense as a whole, with him as at the right guard spot.
And you know what's kind of wild to me is we haven't seen Jamari Sawyer play a single snap at guard in the NFL. Yet everyone internally, externally, nationally, locally, is so bullish on Jamaree Salyer.
How could you not, after essentially,
so.
right, after picking up the pieces for Rashawn Slater when he goes down for an injury and playing as admirably as he did? How could you not be excited for someone coming into that role?
But that's why this is like a huge variable and a big X factor on what could and could not turn into a success for the Chargers team, because Jamaree Salyer was so good at pass protection, and that was outside at tackle. But like, you put him in a phone booth when everyone's already talked about, like, all he has to do is get his hands on you and you're not moving. And then now he's going to be there.
It's just to see the sight of him pancaking guys when you have two other big horsemen next to you. Just the potential to see him going downfield.
Yeah.
and
David Zion Johnson together. Like, that's
what gets me excited.
Those are two very strong, like arguably some of the strongest players on the entire team as your two guards. But the reason why this is a variable is if he doesn't play well at guard, there's a whole bunch of ramifications that happen then. Like, does he then move back over to tackle and do something with Trey Pipkins? I mean, I don't know, but he played so good at tackle that, like, you don't know. But like, what do they do? I legit don't know what they do if he doesn't. So that's why I'm with you. Jamaree Salyer, while there's so many things that point to obviously him playing very, very well and his offensive line being very good with him, that's a risk. We haven't seen a single snap of him at guard. There's no reason to think he wouldn't be as good or better than he was at tackle, but still, who knows? We're sticking to offense, Jake. We talked about Kellen Moore being an X factor and his impact on Justin Herbert. But I think another one is kind of the wide receiving core. And, let's say the Chargers didn't draft receivers this year and they just had the same guys.
Oh,
that doesn't sound fun. I don't like that. But I think there still is going to be a Kellen Moore bump in production and utilization for that group. But there's a reason why they drafted wide receiver number 1, at least in the first round. Where's number 1? Quentin Johnston changes the math on this offense because of what he can bring as a speed threat combined with kind of that yards after catch size kind of guy that can do a lot of things. On offense specifically, he might be the one single player that changes how this offense looks year over year the most. Because Kellen Moore, obviously, but player-wise, maybe a healthy Justin Herbert this year versus last year, but like
that as well.
They didn't have anyone like Quentin Johnston last year. So X factor on offense? Give me one bigger than Quentin Johnston.
I mean, I think the arrival of Quentin Johnston is just going to create more one-on-one opportunities around the field. And it's going to make you open up your playbook a little bit more to stretch defenses out. Dan, we were talking about it just a couple weeks ago. How would we like to see this offense running 5 receiver sets the way that they do in Buffalo or the way that they do in Cincinnati? And to have just, even if you go off the top 3 in Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, and as of this moment, Quentin Johnston, that brings you back to the days of Tyrell Williams, Keenan Allen, and Mike Williams, when the Chargers had 2 big bodies on the outside that they could go to.
But look at, I think the part that's fascinating, this is what I was saying, like what it looked like before. Keenan Allen, Josh Palmer, Mike Williams, Jalen Guyton. When those guys were healthy, like that was a pretty damn good wide receiving core. But they still didn't have some of the things that they now have with like Quentin Johnston's a whole different beast than Jalen Guyton, if we're just being called spade a spade.
Yes.
So while Josh Palmer is great, they've had that before. And him coming back and him performing very well this year, I don't think that's an X factor.
No, because kind of like what you said with Zion just a few minutes ago, we've seen that. So we've seen Josh Palmer establish himself as a weapon for this team. Now, could obviously that improve? Sure. But for Quentin Johnston to come in his rookie year, I'm not sitting here trying to advocate that it's going to be Garrett Wilson Rookie of the Year type season for Quentin Johnston, because there's only one football to go around. And Quentin Johnston currently is surrounded by a plethora of wide receiver talent on this team, not to mention the other positions that are littered with talent on this Chargers offense. But in terms of, as you said, Dan, what he's going to do for this offense, there was a big reason why the Chargers went after him. We could talk about speed. We could talk about his big body, his catch radius, whatever you want to say about what he did in a limited production role for TCU, even though he was their number one wide receiver. The stats aren't the biggest that you've ever seen coming out of a wide receiver in college. But for what he could possibly do in this jump, and even after everything that we have heard from Daniel Popper's article that he wrote about Chris Beatty and what he's been doing with him in the offseason, so just those little nuggets of extra work that Quentin Johnston has put in. And we've seen the highlights from OTAs and minicamp, and everything as of this point right now looks extremely promising. But what is that all going to look like when you tie it together with Kellen Moore's playbook and this downfield passing attack? I think it's going to open up a number of different windows for Justin Herbert to go to.
I agree. The elephant in the room, I think we have to talk about this. And probably the bigger X factor than anything else that we've talked about, any player, any coach. Is there any question that team health is the biggest X factor? Is there any question that is the number one thing that can make or break this season?
Look, some people out there in the mainstream media choose to discredit the Chargers just because simply their narrative is that the Chargers never stay healthy.
They can't stay healthy.
And that they can't trust them. So, yeah, you want to call this an elephant in a room, you want to call this an X factor, sure, because we get tired of saying the phrase on paper or if X player can stay healthy. We get tired of saying stuff like that. So, yes and no. I mean, you never want to talk about the aspect of health. We know that injuries are going to happen at some point during the season.
It's the volume. It's the volume of injuries.
It's the volume. It's the severity. It's a number of different things. But yeah, unfortunately, this is just one of those hexes that the Chargers have not been able to get over in a while. So sure. Yeah, it's an obvious one. We're all praying in our own particular point in time that the Chargers stay healthy, obviously crossing our fingers and toes and whatever else we can. But yeah, health obviously has to be one, but I kind of hate talking about that.
I know, and I don't either. And I think, but you hear people say, oh, well, health is something for every team. Like, and it is. But I think the thing that will make or break it for the Chargers is like, it's health happens. I get it. But like last year's health situation for this team was insane. I've never seen that for one team, except maybe the Ravens, because they've been decimated a few times. They should be able to withstand an injury or two, regardless of how high or low on the depth chart they are. But like if you get 15 guys, or if you get like 5, 6 Pro Bowl, all pro guys that are getting hurt, like then that's an X factor. It has to be. Let's talk about some supporting roles that I think are X factors. Tight end 2, RB 2. I think are big ones. We've heard Austin Eckler talk about it for years now. Like, please, somebody compete for my job. Nobody has. We've seen tight end 2 kind of be non-existent for this Chargers team in terms of production for a few years now. Both of those roles, RB2 and tight end 2, are up for grabs in terms of production and snaps and opportunities. Is it going to be Isaiah Spiller? Is it going to be Joshua Kelly? Is it going to be Donald Parham that we think that could be that breakout star that can be downfield? Can he stay on the field? Like, I think that's where you're going to see a boost in production if some of those supporting roles and supporting players can lift them up a bit. So RB2, tight end 2, which one of those two would you say is more important to the success of this team?
It's interesting because when you're talking about tight end 2 in Donald Parham, essentially in this case behind Gerald Everett, he's valuable to you in a number of different reasons. Why? Because he's your best blocking tight end that you currently have on this role. Trey McKitty, who he was drafted because of his blocking skills in college, you just haven't seen that come to fruition at the next level yet. And from the standpoint in this particular offense, Dan, can we please see the 12 personnel, the 2 tight end sets, dominate in between the 20 and the end zone? Let's see that. Let's see what type of tricks Kellen Moore could put together with having Gerald Everett and Donald Parham out on the field at the same time and take advantage of those mismatches that either one of those guys can create. I think Donald Parham, unfortunately, obviously has dealt with injuries the last 2 years. And as you said, Dan, the search for tight end 2 on this Chargers roster has been going on for some time now, and nobody has been able to really take that role. Donald Parham is the closest thing. If it wasn't for injuries, this would have been solidified. And I'm not even saying that someone is coming in to compete for this role with Donald Parham. But I think the aspect of having Donald Parham out on this field for the full duration of the season is going to open up so many different things for this Chargers offense, specifically at that tight end spot. Because yes, Gerald Everett goes out and he has a career year for himself, really stepped up, even in a playoff loss against Jacksonville, and showed a lot of other good moments throughout the year. But you got to get more out of that position, essentially, especially when we're talking about the best blocking tight end on this roster. You have to be able to get more production out of it. And when you have a guy that's the physical attributes of Donald Parham, how can you not want to take advantage of this guy's athleticism and his measurables? So having a guy like that out there in the field is just, it's another weapon. It's your best blocking tight end. It's going to help in your run game as well. So yeah, in terms of who I would say would be more prominent as it stands right now, I would go Donald Parham.
I'm gonna take the other way,
which is totally fine. I totally get it, because
there's no right answer or wrong answer.
The search for running back 2 has been going on for just as long as tight end for
the Chargers. Got to get someone that can run between the tackles that's not named Austin Eckler, so that way they can let Austin Eckler be Austin Eckler. Like, give him a break for a sec. The Chargers need somebody that can get 4 yards a clip and actually stay on the field. Can that be Isaiah Spiller? We have no clue what Isaiah Spiller looks like in the NFL. Could it be Josh Kelly? Could we see another jump from him? Whoever it is, can we please see like more than 300 yards for the season from RB2? Like, my goodness, go back and look at RB2's stats. They're disgusting.
Yeah, they're pretty bad.
Both from a production standpoint and a utilization standpoint. They got to get something. And I'm pretty bullish on the fact that one of them will, because of this new offensive scheme and the way that they design run fits. But like, if they don't, and this running game still sucks, that's an issue, especially when you're trying to win playoff games. Go back to Jacksonville. Imagine if you could run, what that would have looked like at the end of the game.
I am as big of an advocate as you are, as his fan base is, to see Isaiah Spiller take that next step. And honestly, he needs to, for as limited as he was utilized last year. This is my own opinion, I still think that Joshua Kelly is going to start off camp as running back 2, simply because of his longevity with the team, familiarity, being in that type of role, and he's earned the right to grow into that RB2 spot. But come the end of preseason, I think it's Isaiah Spiller's role. I just don't see how you can look at a guy that is the caliber of Isaiah Spiller, what he did in college, the type of running back that I think is going to fit exactly into the system that Kellen Moore wants to for a downfield rushing attack. I think this is easily Isaiah Spiller's job at the end of training camp. No question.
Joshua Kelly last year, for reference, on the season, 287 yards on the season.
Please don't say Spiller's numbers, because
with just 69 attempts. Do you want Isaiah Spiller's numbers?
I don't. I've seen them. They're bad. And that's not his fault. It's the fact of his non-utilization.
Yes. Look, I said 300. That number is very low. But like, the fact that they didn't have a single guy go over 300 yards that's not named Austin Eckler. And it's one thing if Austin Eckler was going for 1,600 yards rushing. It's a different thing when he's going for 900, 915 to be exact, and then your RB2 is only doing 287. That's like less than 1,300 yards total. Like, that's not good. I think the last one for me, Jake, is probably Ja'Sir Taylor. And you can kind of lump in like Ja'Sir Taylor with like the Asante Samuel Jr. and the slot corner kind of conversation that kind of peaked up, flared up today. But I think Ja'Sir Taylor is probably one of the biggest variables and X factors in terms of like, we've seen what he can do kind of in short stints. I mean, similar to like Alohi Gilman, but probably more so. Can we see that improvement and extrapolate that out for a season? Given they don't have Bryce Callahan anymore. And sure, in theory, you add JC Jackson, you subtract Bryce Callahan. Like, it should kind of equal each other out in terms of like what that impacts the team in terms of roster management. But those are very different positions. And if Ja'Sir Taylor can make us forget Bryce Callahan, because remember, Bryce Callahan was pretty darn good last year. If Ja'Sir Taylor can do that, then we're cooking with gas. But can he do it in long stretches? We know what Asante Samuel Jr. can do. And Asante Samuel Jr. on the outside in zone coverage is an animal. Top 5 in the NFL as a corner cover in zone coverage. Man coverage, not so much. Ja'Sir Taylor, 6th best cover corner. Man to man. If we can get that, let's ride.
Dan, I'm gonna go off on a little bit of a soliloquy here because I'm glad you brought up the, if you haven't read it yet, Daniel Popper talking about his biggest storylines heading into training camp this week. And it was of mention that he said that Ja'Sir Taylor, basically the nickel role was his to lose, essentially. And so
real quick, sorry. And Ja'Sir Taylor ranks 7th in man coverage. Asante Samuel Jr. ranked 154th. So if we can have those two discrepancies, one who is a baller during man coverage, one who is the same during zone coverage, we have those both on the same team. Now you're cooking.
Just one for reference, the difference in snap count, obviously there's a big disparity there between ASJ and Ja'Sir Taylor. But let me go off on a soliloquy here, Dan, because I'm glad you brought up the whole discussion that's happening with Charger fans right now. If you guys haven't seen it, Daniel Popper basically put out his article of the 10 biggest storylines that he's watching during training camp this year. One of them was talking about Ja'Sir Taylor taking over the nickel spot, and essentially it's his to lose for this upcoming season. So everybody's kind of, or I don't want to say everybody, a lot of people have been throwing their hands up to say, like, how could this be possible that Ja'Sir Taylor is going to be starting over Asante Samuel Jr., this, that, and the other. And it kind of caused a little dust up on Twitter, or X today, if you will. But this is how I view it. Dan, I want to take us back to a year ago when J.C. Jackson was signed to this team. You had a cornerback room that had J.C. Jackson,